The night was supposed to be routine, a quiet operation, just another shift for the officers patrolling the dimly lit streets of Washington, D.C., but what they stumbled upon would change everything. The flashing red and blue lights painted the empty road as a team of officers waited in silence, their radios crackling softly. They weren't after a drug dealer or a small-time crook. This was different. This was bigger. They were setting a trap for one of their own, a man who had spent decades hunting criminals, now standing on the other side of the law. Inside an unmarked police SUV, Detective Ryan Carter tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He had been in the force long enough to know when something didn't add up, and this case reeked of something sinister. The suspect wasn't just anyone. He was a senior FBI agent, someone who had access to classified information, someone with powerful connections. But despite his rank, the evidence against him was undeniable. Whispers of corruption, missing files, and backdoor deals had led to this moment. The truth had finally caught up with him. The plan was simple: lure him out, make the arrest clean, and get him in for questioning. But nothing about this case had been simple so far. The deeper the police had dug, the more disturbing the truth became. This wasn't just about one agent crossing the line. It was about a cover-up that had been hidden in plain sight, buried under layers of deception. If the rumors were true, then this arrest wouldn't just bring down one man. It could expose a network operating in the shadows, right under the government's nose. As the target's black sedan pulled into the trap, time slowed. The officers moved in, their voices sharp, their weapons drawn. "Step out of the vehicle," one of them ordered. The driver hesitated. Then slowly, the door creaked open, and out stepped the man they had been hunting. His face was unreadable, his expression calm, too calm. Detective Carter felt a chill run down his spine. Something wasn't right. The senior FBI agent raised his hands, but there was something in his eyes, something unsettling. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was almost amusement. And in that moment, Carter knew they hadn't uncovered the full story, not yet. Detective Carter kept his eyes locked on the senior FBI agent, watching for any sudden movements. The way the man stood there, completely composed, sent a wave of unease through him. Most people caught in a sting like this would be panicked, defensive, maybe even angry. But not this guy. He looked like he had been expecting this moment, like he had already planned his next move. The officers moved in, patting him down and securing his hands behind his back. "You have the right to remain silent," one of them said, but the agent just smirked. "I always wondered what this felt like," he muttered under his breath. His voice was calm, almost amused, but there was something chilling beneath it. He wasn't worried, not even a little. Carter stepped forward. "Daniel Lawson," he said, his voice firm. "Senior Special Agent of the FBI. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy." The words felt heavy, but Lawson barely reacted. He just tilted his head slightly, as if he were analyzing Carter, studying him. "You really think you've got it all figured out, don't you?" Lawson said, his tone casual. Carter ignored him. He had seen enough criminals try to manipulate the situation, twist the story in their favor. But this wasn't some street-level criminal. Lawson had been in the FBI for over 20 years. He had handled high-profile cases, interrogated some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. He knew exactly how the system worked because he had been part of it. As they placed him in the back of the police vehicle, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The evidence against Lawson had been strong, too strong, almost as if someone wanted him to be caught. But why? Back at the station, the interrogation room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Lawson sat across from Carter, his hands resting on the table, still cuffed. He leaned back in his chair, perfectly at ease. "You're making a mistake," Lawson said after a long silence. Carter folded his arms. "Yeah? And why is that?" Lawson exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "Because if you're arresting me, that means you don't know who's really pulling the strings." The words sent a chill through the room. Carter knew he had walked into something much bigger than he had imagined. But the question was, how deep did this go? Carter stared at Lawson, his mind racing. The way he had said it, so certain, so calm, unsettled him. Lawson wasn't panicking, wasn't trying to fight the charges. He was trying to tell him something. Or maybe he was playing mind games, twisting the narrative like only a seasoned agent could. Carter leaned forward. If there's something you want to say, now's the time. Lawson smirked, shaking his head. You're asking the wrong questions, detective. He tapped his fingers against the table, the metal of the handcuffs clinking softly. You think I'm the bad guy because that's the way the pieces were arranged for you. But tell me something. Have you even asked why this case fell into your lap so easily? Carter stiffened. He had asked himself that more than once. The evidence had come in fast, almost too neatly packaged. Documents, internal emails, missing case files, all pointing straight to Lawson. It had been enough to convince a judge to sign off on the warrant, but something about it had always felt deliberate. Lawson leaned in slightly. There's a bigger game being played here, Carter, and the people running it, they don't like loose ends. Carter didn't respond right away. He had dealt with corruption before, had seen officers and government officials bend the law for their own gain. But this was different. This wasn't about one rogue agent. If Lawson was telling the truth, then someone with real power had set him up. Someone who didn't just want him arrested, they wanted him out of the way. Before Carter could press further, the door to the interrogation room creaked open. A tall man in a dark suit stepped inside, his presence shifting the energy in the room instantly. He didn't introduce himself, didn't offer a badge. But Carter didn't need one to know exactly who he was. Detective, that'll be all, the man said, his voice smooth, practiced. We're taking it from here. Carter frowned. And you are? The man's expression didn't change. That's not your concern. Lawson exhaled, shaking his head with a quiet chuckle. And there it is, he murmured. Carter felt his stomach twist. Whoever this man was, he had authority. Enough to walk into his precinct and take control without question. But why? And more importantly, who was he really working for? As Lawson was escorted out, he cast one last look at Carter, his eyes steady. Be careful who you trust, he said. And just like that, he was gone. Carter sat in silence, long after Lawson had been taken away, his mind tangled in unanswered questions. He had spent years trusting the system, believing in the work he did. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure who was in control. Something about this whole case felt wrong. The way Lawson had been arrested too easily, the way the mysterious man had walked in and taken over without resistance, it all pointed to something bigger. He pulled up the case files again, scanning through the documents that had led to Lawson's arrest. There was no denying that the evidence looked solid, but what if it had been placed there on purpose? What if someone wanted Lawson taken out of the picture? And if that was true, then who was really behind it? A sudden knock at his office door broke his thoughts. It was Officer Jenna Puttle, one of the few people on the force Carter actually trusted. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. We have a problem, she said, her voice low. Carter straightened. What kind of problem? She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if making sure no one was listening. I tried to pull up Lawson's personnel file from the FBI database, she said. It's gone. Carter's brow furrowed. Gone. Completely wiped, like he never existed. A cold sensation crept up his spine. Lawson had worked in the FBI for decades. There was no way his entire file could just disappear, not unless someone had the power to erase it. Jenna pulled a flash drive from her pocket. I downloaded what I could before it vanished. But you need to see this. Carter plugged the drive into his computer, opening the only file left. It was an old case report, years old. The details were vague, but one thing stood out, a list of names. Some were crossed out, others still intact, but one name at the very bottom sent a chill through him. Daniel Lawson. It wasn't a case Lawson had worked on. It was a list of targets, and he had been on it. Carter felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just about corruption. This was about elimination. Someone had been erasing people connected to this case. And if Lawson had been next, who else was on that list? Before he could process it, his office phone rang. He picked it up, but there was only silence on the other end. Then, a voice, low and measured. "You're asking too many questions, detective." Then the line went dead. Carter's grip tightened around the phone, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. The voice on the other end had been calm, almost indifferent, but the message was clear: back off. Someone was watching him. Someone knew he was getting too close to the truth. He glanced at Jenna, who had heard the silence stretch over the line. Her expression was tense. "That wasn't a random call, was it?" she asked. Carter shook his head. "They know." Jenna swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" Carter exhaled, forcing himself to think. Every instinct told him to play it safe, to shut this down before they ended up like Lawson. But he couldn't walk away. Not now. He had to know who was behind this, and more importantly, why. He looked back at the list of names on the screen. Some were government officials, some former law enforcement, others private contractors. But one name stood out: Mark Reynolds. He wasn't crossed off. Carter didn't know much about him, but if he was still out there, maybe he had answers. "We find Reynolds," he said. "Before they do." Jenna hesitated. "And if they're already watching him?" Carter didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew the risk. An hour later, they were on the road, following what little trail Reynolds had left behind. His last known address was a small apartment outside the city, but when they arrived, the place was abandoned. Dust covered the furniture, and the fridge was empty. He had been gone for a while. Carter was about to call it a dead end when Jenna found something: a small notebook hidden inside a vent. The pages were filled with scattered notes, but one word kept appearing again and again. Asterisk, asterisk, the directive. Asterisk, asterisk. Carter frowned. What the hell is the directive? Before Jenna could respond, a shadow moved outside the window. A second later, the front door burst open. A group of masked men flooded inside, moving fast, weapons drawn. "Down!" Carter yelled, grabbing Jenna as they dove behind the couch. Gunfire erupted, splintering the walls. This wasn't a warning. This was an execution. Whoever these people were, they weren't just trying to scare them off. They wanted them gone. And that meant only one thing: they were closer to the truth than they had realized. Carter's pulse pounded in his ears as bullets tore through the apartment walls. He and Jenna pressed low behind the couch, exchanging a tense glance. They were trapped. Whoever these men were, they weren't here to negotiate. They were here to erase them, just like they had tried to erase Lawson. Carter reached for his gun, signaling Jenna to cover him. He peeked over the couch and fired 2 quick shots, forcing the attackers to scatter. "We need a way out," he shouted. Jenna's eyes darted around the room. "Back door," she yelled. Keeping low, they crawled toward the kitchen. Another round of gunfire shattered the cabinets above them, raining wood and glass onto the floor. They barely made it to the back door before Carter rammed his shoulder into it, breaking it open. They stumbled out into the night air and sprinted through the alley as the masked men charged after them. They ran until their lungs burned, weaving through back streets and empty lots. Finally, they ducked into an abandoned warehouse, pressing their backs against the cold steel walls. Footsteps echoed outside, searching, hunting. Jenna clutched the notebook against her chest, her breathing ragged. "They're not stopping," she whispered. Carter knew she was right. This wasn't just a cover-up anymore. They had stepped into something much bigger. And if they wanted answers, they had only one option: Lawson. They needed to get to him before it was too late. By the time they reached the federal holding facility, the air felt thick with tension. Carter flashed his badge at the guard, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to see Daniel Lawson. Now." The guard hesitated, then checked the system. His frown deepened. That's not possible. Carter's stomach tightened. Why not? The guard looked up. Because Daniel Lawson was transferred an hour ago. Jenna's face paled. Transferred where? The guard hesitated. Officially, a secure facility for high-risk detainees. He glanced around, then leaned in slightly. Unofficially, no one knows. It wasn't an FBI order. Someone higher up pulled the strings. Carter clenched his jaw. Lawson had warned him. He had tried to tell him they weren't dealing with ordinary corruption. Whoever was behind this had control over everything. Police, FBI, even the records. And now, just like that, Lawson had vanished. Jenna gripped his arm. Carter, what if we were wrong? What if Lawson wasn't the one being protected? She swallowed hard. What if he was the last loose end? Carter exhaled, the weight of realization sinking in. They had thought they were chasing a rogue agent, but in reality, Lawson had been running too, trying to stay one step ahead of whoever was really pulling the strings. And now he was gone. A heavy silence filled the air before Jenna whispered, "What do we do now?" Carter looked at the notebook in her hands, then back at the guard. The game wasn't over. The people behind this thought they had buried the truth, but they had made one mistake. They had left behind just enough for Carter to keep digging, and he wasn't stopping now. Carter stood in the dimly lit hallway of the federal facility, his mind racing. Lawson was gone. The case that had seemed so clear at the start had unraveled into something much bigger, something dangerous. He and Jenna had risked everything, only to realize too late that they had been chasing shadows. Jenna flipped through the notebook again, her fingers trembling slightly. "There has to be something in here," she muttered. "Something we missed." Carter watched her for a moment before shaking his head. "They've been ahead of us this entire time. Every lead we follow, every answer we think we're close to, they shut it down." He exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Whoever the directive is, they're untouchable." Jenna looked up, her eyes filled with frustration. "So what? We just walk away?" Carter hesitated. Every instinct told him to keep digging, to push forward. But they had both seen what happened to people who got too close. Lawson had been taken, his existence wiped clean. The names on that list, most of them were already gone, and if they weren't careful, they would be next. "We do what we can," Carter said finally, "but we play it smart." Jenna frowned. "Meaning?" "We don't go after them head-on. That's what they expect." He tapped the notebook. "We hold onto this. We find the right time, the right people, someone who isn't compromised. And when we do, we make sure the truth comes out the right way." Jenna studied him, then nodded slowly. "So we wait." "For now," Carter said. Outside, the city buzzed as if nothing had happened. People walked the streets, oblivious to the forces moving in the shadows. It was unsettling how something so massive could stay hidden in plain sight. But Carter knew better now. As they stepped outside, Jenna turned to him. "Do you think Lawson's still alive?" Carter glanced up at the dark sky, his jaw tightening. "I don't know." But deep down, he had a feeling this wasn't over. Maybe Lawson had vanished, but that didn't mean he was gone for good. And as long as Carter still had questions, he wasn't going to stop looking for answers. For now, they would walk away. But the truth had a way of surfacing, and when it did, Carter would be ready.